Welcome to another edition of the Nebraska Soybean Board Weekly Market Roundup, being brought to you by Nebraska soybean farmers and their checkoff. First and foremost, Happy New Year's. This is the first episode coming into 2025, but with it brings some weather concerns, especially to a lot of our viewers and listeners out there. We're thinking about you as a snowstorm will find its way moving across the Midwest. Well, we're going to take a look at what happened in these markets this last week, of course, with a 24 moving out and 25 moving in. It brought some negativity to the field, especially on that Friday trade. Weather was a big part of it when you looked at South America and their conversations, but also what's going on here in the U.S. Is there some profit taking going on for the corn? How much of a pressure is the wheat seeing, in part because of the weather? And as one person told me, the cattle market just plain old spicy when you looked at the cash. We'll take a look at that and a whole lot more coming up after this.
It may be small, but this little bean fuels power. It powers a food industry as a source of protein. It's a fuel that powers diesel engines while reducing emissions. It powers a state economy and bottom lines. And it powers the rest of the world as a top Nebraska export. Yeah, it may be small, but we're finding more ways for this little bean to power Nebraska.
And welcome back once again. As you can see, Sue Martin joins us. She is with Ag Investment out of Clarion, Iowa. And then, of course, David Ericson with Ag Optimus out of Akron, Iowa. We could just call this the Iowa show with you guys joining us today. I really appreciate your guys' time. And I know that the weekend is upon us, and with it brought some interesting market trade. And I think I wanted to start out first and foremost with this weather, because we know that weather is going to continue to play a role, especially in South America. And they seem to kind of ebb and flow as to what really is going to happen with this forecast. And Sue, I'm going to start with you. What are you hearing when it comes to the soybeans and the weather that they're dealing with right now?
Well, the rain in the forecast, there is some rain showers forecast for southern Brazil, and they've been drying out here. First, they were pretty wet, almost to the point where there was fear that there would be flooding. Now it's thought that they are drying out, and they're thought they could catch some light showers that move across part of Argentina. But otherwise, the rest of the country has had nice rains, good showers. Some of these private sources, analysts, first they were 170 to 175, and then today some of them even jumped to 180, which I think is a little bit overambitious. But it's going to be interesting because there's been a new disease found in soybeans in Brazil, and you don't hear a lot of talk about it. And it's taken 5 to 6 applications of the same fungicide that they utilized for Asian rust, but you don't hear anything. I keep saying, oh, the beans look good. And I'm wondering, is it possible that we see this bean market try to come back, test these lows, and all of a sudden they turn back stronger again because maybe yields aren't going to be as high? The USDA stands at 169, little over 169. And of course, the USDA ag attaché jumped to 165, still well under the USDA. And I kind of wonder if we won't see that increased a little bit to align a little more maybe on next week's reports by the USDA.
David, what about for you? What are you hearing in regards to weather in Brazil? And I know that things have seemed to change every day. Something new and different is kind of catching the market's attention.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the concern when it comes to the South American weather right now is dealing more with the corn. And, some of that corn is starting to pollinate down there in some of the regions. So, it's no different down there than it is up here. If the weather is pretty dry through the pollination, that can absolutely take some off the yield. Sue was kind of alluding to, some different disease pressures that are going on in the soybeans. And soybeans are, such a very tricky plant, in my opinion, to, estimate what the yield's going to be, because a lot of it has to do with, if you miss a rain here or there, they can look great from the field, and they can even look great when you get into the field. But if those pods don't fill out, and that's something that we had to deal with here probably, right around the area where our office is located. We didn't catch a rain in the month of August, which is, up here, that's a very crucial time. So yeah, I mean, I think just like anything, there's a lot of story left to be told, but it's definitely, we need to be paying attention to as the crop progresses down there. And, if we are going to see a decrease or a change in the yield expectations.
Wheat wise, Sue, I know that there's not a lot of snow cover, shall we say, right now in parts of Kansas, and these bitterly cold temperatures will bring some snow with it. But is the weather and what's weighing on the way the wheat market traded on a Friday with such a big drop?
Well, I think part of it was in sympathy with corn and soybeans, but wheat also, I think, might have been dealing a little bit with the weather forecast and some seasonality where the market tends to drift off at this time, although today was more than a drift. However, I wouldn't sell wheat with wooden nickels right now. I think wheat's setting itself up to be a buy. If it's an end user, or not an end user, but a producer that has made cash sales, he might want to take a look at where we're at in these prices. And especially as we enter into next week, if we follow through with some more selling. This market's pushed wave 4, not on Elliott wave, but on price projection. That's usually a support shelf in this market. And that's even based on KC wheat. And I think the snow forecast probably coming across Kansas helped that market set back today.
How much profit taking, David, was there on this corn market?
Oh, I think there was a good portion of profit taking, and I think that was probably the biggest thing that was weighing on the corn market. It was probably down a little bit in sympathy to the soybean market and the wheat market. Obviously the soybeans were the leader to the downside today, but I think, as we got into, as we flipped the page, turned into 2025, I think there were a lot of producers that, either sold cash grain or, we've had a real nice run up in the corn. And so there probably some profit taking there. I do think that corn remains to have a pretty good story overall. The export numbers that were reported. And I always struggle, whether to talk about export numbers or how much weight you give those, because it is in fact a delayed number. So I tend to think that a lot of that's baked into the market, but it was right within expectations, maybe a touch on the lower end of it, still using a good amount for ethanol. And yeah, we're looking at a scenario where we're grinding quite a bit more corn than we were a year ago at this time. So I think the use and the demand for the corn is good, and I think our carryout is manageable. So yeah, I think a lot of it was profit taking up against these kind of previous highs or in this kind of high end range.
Sue, I understand there's some internal pressure happening right now in China. After their president did his speech, and then the stock markets there took a drop. What are you seeing with that political issues, and is it going to weigh in on what we see with their buying capabilities?
Well, I think that first off, the yuan fell pretty much. I think it was 2.7. I think it was just a little over 2.7, and that is pretty, or I should say 2.2 to the dollar, and that's getting pretty narrow. But also, I think that when we look at China, President Xi's got his hands pretty full right now with the economy, trying to get people back to work, get things really rolling. The Chinese are used to being savers, and they used a lot of their savings while they were under lockdown for 3 years. So now they're trying to get back to where they're saving money and they're not really spending so much. But when I look at China and I look at the dollar, and I know some are negative the dollar, I think this year is going to be bullish to the dollar. And that, of course, then means it costs more for China to buy. After we get President-elect Trump back in office, I'm wondering, will we see China try to pull the stunt of canceling some bean orders and trying to break the prices? And in doing so, However, I don't think they're going to be real successful. I think that the situation between the U.S. and China is probably going to be more concerning for the rest of Asia and not so much the U.S. I think we're going to have a much better, how do I want to say it, relationship than we've had. And in the last go around, and I wouldn't be surprised to see President Xi say to Trump, we didn't get a chance to really show our hand in that phase one agreement because we went into COVID and 3 years of lockdown. So how about we go back to agreeing to phase one? And that might avoid that. But then you get into the BRICS and the dollar and what have you, and that might bring another situation around. But, Trump reached out to Xi. We knew he wouldn't come, but he reached out to him anyway. When that first assassination attempt happened, you had President Xi reaching out to Trump. And of course, Xi gets along very well with Putin. And I think Putin and Trump get along very well. They respect each other. And I think they know what to expect from each other. So I think we're in a whole different playing field than we were before.
I want to jump over to the livestock side, and I love this description as spicy for this cash cattle market. And David, I don't know what other word except, ringing in the new year with an extra party or something, because who would have ever thought 200 and 315 and hearing some gates possibly closing because of it?
Yeah, I would say that the producer definitely had the leverage coming into this week. And most of the week, a lot of packers were, they were trying to get cattle bought in, from 196, I think is the kind of first bid that I heard. And then coming into the day, it was 198, and a lot of people they weren't selling, and they kind of dug their heels in. And, eventually the packer had to pay up, and, they paid a lot of $2 in the north, which for, I think, just about everyone who sold was the first time. So, that's kind of a deal to start off the new year, like you said. The interesting thing that I think that we need to pay attention to is we need to see how much the packer got bought, and if they finally got enough inventory around them to where they won't have to be in such need here over the next 2, 3, 4, over the next while. If they got enough inventory around them, then, that we might start to see a little bit of that leverage shift away from the producer and back to the packer. But it felt to me like the packer finally made the decision that, hey, we're going to quote unquote rip off the Band-Aid here. We're going to pay up, and we're going to get a lot of inventory around us. And I think that's what they tried to accomplish, but we'll have to wait and see if they actually got that taken care of.
Well, I know what a great way to end the weekend for these guys. And I know, Sue, as you and I have talked many times before, there's the weather concern that'll build in to maybe what we see early next week, depending on how much snow is falling in cattle growing areas.
Well, I think, too, it's not only the snow, it's these bitterly cold temperatures. And we're probably looking at the highest weights right now, and weights are going to do nothing but come down as we go through the rest of this winter. This is not going to be a winter like last year where we had very mild temperatures. This is going to be where weights continue to drop, so therefore you lose some tonnage. And I think, though, the cutout might have reached its peak here for this month. And a lot of times seasonally, you'll see something like that anyway. But, the cash market being as strong as it was, I think was also being prompted. I agree with seeing that we were going to have the packer bid for cattle because he needed them going in through all of next week. But the packer's losing money. And the cutout dropping, if I'm right on that, he's going to lose more money. So the cattle market gave up today, too. It didn't really hold on to its gains. And I think, that $2 level, I think is a pretty pricey level for cattle. Not that they maybe aren't justified, but I would have to say in feeders, I'd be a little cautious up here on cattle, and I would on fats as well. We may have hit a peak here today.
All right. Well, our time is up, unfortunately. I thank both of you for joining us. Happy New Year as well to both of you.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year.
A quick reminder to everybody, information on the show is provided for educational purposes and not intended to influence legislation, government policy, or action. Quick reminder, commodity futures and options do involve a substantial risk of loss not suitable to all investors. And that's another edition of the Nebraska Soybean Board Weekly Market Roundup.